I want to begin right where Uri ended up. Do you remember where he ended up? It was in France. And I want to correct something he said about France. He said that they have wonderful food there. He forgot to mention the wine. And I just want to add that to it. But he also mentioned that compared to our economy in this country, the chances of upward mobility in France and in most of Europe are greater than they are in the United States. And we need to fix that. And the people who can fix it are us in this room. That's what developmental ed's primary role is, exactly where Uri ended up, with this idea that we are promoting the American dream, that we're giving people who, without us, wouldn't have a shot at improving their status in life, now have a shot. And so it's really important work we're doing, and we can't emphasize it enough. So having started where Uri ended, I now want to circle all the way back to where Uri started. Where was that? Do you remember? On a chicken farm? I'm not going to go back that far. Although I thought there was a sort of chicken theme as you started, Uri. You had the chicken farm, and then you were talking about playing chicken with the state legislature in Connecticut. And I thought that was going to be the overarching theme. Luckily, we moved on. But I want to go back to Connecticut because I was speaking in Connecticut just about 6 weeks ago at a statewide conference much like this. And some of you may, I'm not going to give you all the gory details, but many of you probably saw the headline last spring in Inside Higher Ed that Senator Beth Bayh in Connecticut had introduced a bill in the state legislature to abolish developmental education in the state. And luckily, the legislature modified that bill quite a bit before it finally passed, but pass it did. And in its final form, it makes some fairly draconian changes in the way developmental ed is delivered in Connecticut. I'm talking about this because Connecticut is a very top-down, as that little episode illustrates, even to the point of the state legislature dictating how developmental ed will be structured in all the community colleges and state universities of Connecticut. And I'm a great opponent of that. I think that top-down authoritative way of trying to reform developmental ed is not the way to go about it. And that's why I'm glad to be here in New Jersey, because you all are a much more decentralized state. But I want to sort of lay a little bit of a burden on you. I'm depending on you to get it right. I'm depending on you to prove that we community colleges can do a good job of redesigning developmental ed, and we don't need state senators to introduce legislation to force us to do it. So it's a double-edged sword. I don't want top-down authoritarian mandates to do things, but I want us to do them and do them well, and I think we will. And one of the things that we'll do is recognize local differences and that there is more than one way to reform developmental ed, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today. So let's get started. What I'm going to talk about today, a little bit about what's the problem that we're trying to address, and I'm going to focus on developmental writing, but I think much of what I have to say, especially much of the sort of principles and overarching ideas, are equally applicable to developmental courses in math and reading as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've identified the problem we're trying to address with ALP. I'm going to talk about a variety of solutions, because I really do believe there are a variety of solutions. And I also believe that the smartest colleges will do many of the solutions and not just try to focus on one. I'll then talk about ALP, the one program, one solution that I'm most familiar with. I'll give you some data on how ALP has done. And I'll talk, one of the things when people hear about ALP for the first time, they say, well, I believe it works, it looks great, but we can't afford it at my school. I want to talk a little bit about the costs. And then this is the last point, is faculty development. If we have time, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's really, really important. We're just beginning to focus on it at my school, and I know some of you are probably ahead of us on that score. So let's start with what's the problem that we're trying to address. Back in the early 90s, I did a longitudinal study of the developmental writing courses at what was then Essex Community College. We often got mail addressed to those of you from Essex County College in New Jersey, and there's also an Essex Community College in Massachusetts, and we all got each other's mail confused sometimes. We're now Community College of Baltimore County, and but in 1990, I had just been awarded with my first computer, an Apple IIe, and we crunched the numbers on that Apple IIe, and I wanted to answer the question, how are we doing? How's our program doing? And here's what I came up with. Our developmental courses are pass-fail. Students get an S or a U. And what we found was 57% of the students placed in our upper-level developmental course got an S. Not necessarily on the first time, but I was looking back from 4 years in the future. So I followed these students for 4 years. And 57% got an S within 4 years, which meant 43% didn't. And then I wanted to see, well, how did they do when they got to what we call English 101? Some of you call it English 121. I understand being a decentralized state, you can call it anything you want at New Jersey community colleges, which makes it easy on me. I don't have to remember what your official number is, and I can still call it English 101. And so what we found was a whopping 81% of the students who passed our developmental course and took English 101 got an A or a B or a C in English 101, and 19% didn't. That was just incredible, and for a few weeks I went around patting myself on the back and showing everybody the statistics, particularly my skeptics over on the social sciences side, who are the ones who had raised this question in the first place. But I had a nagging feeling that somehow these data didn't capture the true situation. I kept thinking about going to graduation every June and how few of my developmental students I ever saw walk across the stage. And so I started working on trying to figure out why is this not, and I'm only bringing this up in case any of you think that this is the way you would produce the data that Uri was calling for, that this is not the way you evaluate a program. Here's the problem. Same Apple IIe computer, the same 863 students who took our developmental course in academic year 88-89, but we're going to this time analyze the data in a different way. The same 57% passed within 4 years, passed English 052, our upper-level developmental course. But here was the huge surprise. It's this box down here. 16% of the students who passed the developmental course dropped out of the system at that point and never within 4 years attempted English 101. That was the really that moment, seeing that 16% was the birth of ALP, because that's when I realized that the problem wasn't that. I thought the problem was, are the students who passed doing well in 101? But the problem is, are they getting to 101? And one of the things we found was, it's clear these students had not failed, they had passed, and yet gave up. It's also clear to most of us who've taught developmental writing that a large percentage of these students who'd never passed the developmental course didn't really fail, they also gave up. I'm not sure how it is at your school. At my school, by Thanksgiving, typically in a traditional developmental course, half the classes stopped coming. So it's that problem that we began to identify and to try to address with ALP. And now what we find is that whopping 81% success rate has dropped down to 33%, because now we're measuring it as 33% of the original cohort. And I want to urge you, as you try to evaluate your programs, that you evaluate it this way, not of the ones that make it into the credit level course, how do they do, but how many make it and how many of the original cohort. And that was a real wake-up call for us. So that was 1993, and then we started asking this question, well, why is there this huge dropout rate? Well, we're English teachers, so we're pretty sure we knew the answer. They were things like can't write a thesis statement, they write sentence fragments, they don't know how to provide concrete examples to support their arguments, they have trouble with MLA format, and so forth. We then asked the students, we first of all tried to contact the students who dropped out, and we reached like 2% of them because their phones had been turned off, they'd moved away, they were angry at us and they weren't going to respond to our emails. So we started asking all of the students in developmental courses at the beginning of the semester, and we did this for, I think, 4 semesters. If you were to have to drop out of school before the semester is over, which of the following might be factors in dropping out? And here's what they told us. They told us financial problems, #1 on the hit parade, legal problems, changes in their hours at work, car trouble, abusive situation where they're living, getting evicted from their apartments, health problems, problems with their children, getting laid off. All of these kinds of things that we've grouped under the term life happens. And those were the bulk of the reasons. And some of the financial reasons was the most popular reason they would check off on this growing list. We would take and we would have an other, and whatever they would fill in on other, the next semester we would add it to the list. But lots of the other reasons, like being evicted from their apartment or not being able to get their car repaired, were also financial problems, so that really stood out for us. But we also found, not as frequently, and perhaps not as frequently because it's less likely that people want to talk about this, but there was another category of problems. Problems like they became discouraged, they lost confidence, they became depressed, they felt isolated, they felt they weren't prepared for college. Sometimes they would even say, I don't think I'm college material. The stress became too great. And so we lumped these under the umbrella of affective issues, things sort of going on in their psyches. And so our analysis was that those two categories, life issues and affective issues, which we've lumped together under the term non-cognitive issues, were an important part of why our developmental program was so unsuccessful. They were an important part of the problem. So what's the solution? Well, I actually should have made that word plural. What are the solutions? And that's what I'd like to talk to for a few minutes here. I'm going to summarize all the solutions I'm familiar with, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to explain each of them in detail. And then at the end of that explanation, I'll talk about our program in some detail. But the reason I'm doing this is, as Eileen, or maybe it was Karen, in the first presentation on the white paper this morning pointed out, there are lots of things we can do to make DevEd work better, and we shouldn't just focus on one and do it. Uri made the same point about we need to reform the whole system. So I want these different solutions address different parts of the problem, and I think it was Eileen who mentioned avoidance this morning, and I've seen that word used in print a lot, and as a person who, when I was the head of the writing program, I was in charge of getting students into the course that they were placed in, because students were always trying to circumvent the system and avoid so I call this, it's the same thing though, reducing the need for developmental ed. And one way a lot of places are working on doing that is improved work with the K through 12 system, so that it is producing people who are ready, who are college ready more often, and that the high school teachers understand what we mean by college ready, so that our systems are more aligned. And I think that's really important work. Dual enrollment, having high school students take college level courses so that the students themselves are more aware of whether they're prepared for college level courses or not. And finally, early assessment and intervention. I think the intervention is just as important. If doing early assessment and not doing anything about it doesn't help much, but if you can give students a version of the AccuPlacer or the Compass or whatever assessment tool you use, if you can give them that in their junior year while they have time to work, and if the school develops interventions that will help get them up to speed, then it will reduce the number of students who need developmental ed. It'll help them avoid developmental ed. Oh, and yes, summer bridge programs. I forgot I had a fourth one. Summer bridge programs, if the K through 12 work doesn't work, and it won't work 100%, we know that, then a lot of schools are experimenting with some kind of intensive boot camp experience in the summer that will help students obviate the need for developmental courses in the fall. The best program I know about that actually is at a tiny little college, Pasadena Community College. They have a summer boot camp in math that seems to, lots of these summer boot camp programs run into the problem that students need to work in the summer to save money to go to school in the fall, and so that was our experience, and our summer boot camp was not successful. We're going to try again next summer with a little more financial support for students, but Pasadena Community College has a really successful program. So the second sort of family of interventions that I'm aware of for redesigning developmental writing comes under the sort of umbrella term of contextualizing. And so one of the really widely used approaches to this is learning communities. Now, there are learning communities that join the second semester English course with a history course, and those are great. But here I'm talking about learning communities that that pair a developmental course in reading, writing, or math with a credit course. And those, I think, are a wonderful idea. I've taught some myself. I know that the data on long-term effects of those is not completely convincing yet, but there are people out at Evergreen State University and people up at Queensborough College and Community College in New York who are working hard to demonstrate that they are effective if done in a really thorough way. So I think learning communities are a promising intervention. Uri mentioned the IVEST program, again out in Washington, which contextualizes developmental courses with career-based programs so that you're learning math as you're learning welding, and you're working on math problems that are related to welding problems. Now, a third overarching approach to reforming developmental education is in some way supplementing what's going on. The most widespread version of this are the student success courses, of which there's just been a proliferation in recent years, and some of which are really, really good, and some of which are not so effective. And so, I think just saying you have a student success course isn't enough. You really need to do some of the data gathering about what students need and what they're getting from the course to make sure that it is addressing their needs. Another supplementing model is supplemental instruction, having students who've succeeded in the course in earlier semesters sit in and work with other students outside of class in study groups, in writing groups, and so forth, and also tutoring in writing centers or math centers or reading centers to help students with whatever difficulties they're finding are not addressed in class. I think all of those are wonderful ideas. But of course, the area I'd like to focus on today is the area of redesign that goes under the umbrella of acceleration. A really good friend of mine, Howard Tenberg, who's now the incoming chair of 4Cs, the English teacher, writing teachers national organization, has a recent article in which he criticizes acceleration and argues that students don't need less time. If anything, they need more. And I think I adopted the term acceleration early on, and I wish I hadn't, because it does sound to lots of people like we're going to just push them through without much concern for whether they really learn. And that is not the case. And in fact, as you will see in the model of acceleration that I've developed, and in lots of other models of acceleration, students don't get less time, they just get time structured in a different way. And I'm going to illustrate that in just a minute. But one approach to acceleration is modularization. Modularization means you take a complicated topic and you break it down into bite-sized units, and students only have to do those units that they need. They don't have to do the whole 15 weeks worth of developmental reading or writing or math. I have severe reservations about whether writing skills can effectively be modularized. I haven't seen it anywhere yet. And I ask this question all the time. There are math people who have severe reservations about whether modularization works for most math students. And so, but it's very widely used, and I think well worth looking into, thinking about which kinds of students that might work best for. Often, modularization involves computer-assisted instruction, but not always. If the people from Northern Virginia had been here today, they would have talked about some modularization courses that don't involve heavy dependence on my math lab. Compressed courses. Now we're getting closer to my true approach to redesigning developmental ed. Compressed courses usually take two courses that each of which would take 15 weeks, so the student would, if they need 2 levels of math or reading or writing, they would take one in the fall and one in the spring, and compress them into one semester. In most cases, the courses don't have less seat time in class. They meet twice as many hours for one semester. The earliest one of these I know about is the Stretch program at Arizona State University. It's been around for almost 15 years now and has been highly successful. Greg Glau developed it, but these exist in math programs and English programs all around the country. Corequisite courses, and that's a term that I hadn't been using before about a year ago, and maybe some of you haven't heard about it. So if I were naming ALP all over again, I think I would use this corequisite term because it more accurately captures what we're trying to do in ALP. So how does a co-requisite course work? Well, you all know, in a traditional developmental course, in any discipline, the student's placed, perhaps in one developmental course. They take that the first semester, and if they're successful in their second semester, they take the credit level course. Sometimes they're not successful, and sometimes large numbers of students are not successful. And when they're not, when I was the head of the writing program and we had a program like this, my idea was, well, if it's not working with a one-semester developmental course, maybe we need 2 and 3 and 4 at 5 levels at San Francisco, at the Community College of City College in San Francisco, 5 levels of developmental math. But it's a perfectly logical thing. If one semester is not working for many of our students, let's take the lower half and give them 2 semesters, or 3 or 4. Now, as Uri talked about those exit points a minute ago, that's the flaw in this system. Remember that the main reason students aren't successful is not because they write sentence fragments. It's not because they can't figure out exponential equations. The main reason students are not successful is because life happens, or they get too depressed, or too convinced they're not college material. The longer a path we give them to move through, the longer of a pipeline there is for them to move through, the more chance they'll drop out. So what most of us did, I'm the person who proposed our lower level course at my school, with the best of intentions, actually reduced the chances of students succeeding. The co-requisite model works quite differently. In the first semester, the student signs up for a credit course and the developmental course. So the developmental course is no longer a prerequisite, but a co-requisite for the credit course. And that changes almost everything. It changes students' attitudes towards the course. It changes what we do in the course. Just for one example, when you're teaching a developmental course as a co-requisite to a credit course, when you're teaching a traditional model, the goal of the developmental course, the one up here at the top, is to get as many students as possible to pass the developmental course. The goal in this course is to get as many students as possible to pass the credit course. And it changes the way, without any faculty development, it changes the way you teach. It changes the way students perceive the course. No longer is the developmental course an obstacle for which they're paying tuition and not getting college credit, and it's standing in the way of where they want to be. Now the developmental course is there. They're in the credit course where they want to be, and the developmental course is actually helping them. In fact, talk about contextualization. The developmental course is helping to contextualize, it is contextualized in the credit level course. So that's basically what the co-requisite model is. And there are a number of co-requisite models. They aren't all ALP. A number of people, University of South Carolina actually started the studio approach, where students take a one-credit studio, they're placed in the credit course and take a one-credit studio. Some schools send them to a computer lab. I'm not necessarily recommending this, but some schools do that. The stretch format I mentioned a minute ago, where they take the credit level course, but they take it over 6 hours a week over one semester, or 3 hours a week over 2 semesters. But finally, and what I would like to focus on for the next few minutes, is ALP, the Accelerated Learning Program. And so let's talk about how it works. Let me tell you a little bit, just so you understand the context, because I think it's really important to recognize that no model, even the one that's closest to my heart, is going to work in every context. It's going to have to be tailored to your local conditions, both your student body, your faculty, your experiences, your budget, all kinds of policy matters that you have to worry about, credentialing at your school, and so forth. But let's talk about CCBC just for a minute so you understand at least the context that this program was developed in. We have 33,000 plus students at CCBC. Our average age is 29. We have more women than men. It used to be 2 to 1, and men are coming back to college now in a little greater numbers. About 50% students of color, most of which in Baltimore are African American students, but a healthy contingent also of Hispanic students and a few Asian and Native American students. Our full-time to part-time ratio is about 2 to 1. 81% of our students are placed into at least one developmental course. Math gets the bulk of them, English is next, and reading is third. The math program has 3 levels of developmental math. Reading has 2, and in English we have 2. But here's a really important point I want to make, because often hear people say that ALP works well with students close to the cutoff for English 101. I don't buy that argument, and here's why. At our school, of the students placed in developmental English, 90% of them are placed in English 052, and that's everyone who's placed in that course is eligible to take ALP. I was talking to some people earlier this morning, and they said, I heard you're going to just take everybody into ALP. I'm advocating that. Let's do away with the lower level course, but I have not won that argument at my school yet. And the people who are resisting it most are the people who teach that lower level course, and their argument is those students won't be able to do ALP. My argument is they're not doing it now. They're only 13% of students placed in English 051 ever pass 101. And I think the reasons they don't are some of the same reasons that I just outlined earlier about life issues and so forth. So our upper level developmental course is 90%. I hope someday we'll just let 100% of our developmental students do ALP, but my colleagues aren't ready to do that yet. If students who pass the developmental sequence that they're required to take, then take English 101. And we have a second semester credit English course that is required in all of our AA programs and AAS programs and most of our certificate programs. Not all. There are a few certificate programs that don't require it. So now, finally, how does ALP itself work? Okay, so here's our hypothetical student. You can identify her by her baseball cap. She arrives on campus and is assessed. We use Accuplacer. We're not particularly proud of that fact, but that's what we use. CCRC is doing a good job of questioning that decision on our part, but we're actually, I was really interested in the decision zone, because we don't seem to be able to, what I've been arguing for, I think Donald said I'd been teaching at my school for 35 years, and for 34 and a half of those years, I've been arguing for placement by writing portfolio, if not that, at least a writing sample, single essay. And you could tell how effective I am at arguing these things. But what we are considering now is that for students a few points above and below the cutoff on the Accuplacer, we would assess them by a much more of a direct assessment of their writing ability rather than the Accuplacer sentence skills test. So I haven't won that argument yet either, but there is hope. So the student arrives and she's told she needs to take developmental English, but there is this option that we call ALP. And if she elects that option, then, as you can see on the slide, she registers for a designated section of English 101, where she's joined by 9 other developmental students. And they're joined by 10 students whose placement is the 101 course. And they have a teacher, of course. So now, I want to pause here and talk about some of the advantages to this part of the model. I'm going to talk about the rest of the model in just a minute. But what we're doing is we're reducing, being placed in developmental courses is stigmatizing to our students. Have you noticed how developmental textbooks are often large formats with spiral bindings? And have you noticed how your students hide those in their knapsacks when they go to the cafeteria for lunch? They don't want to be marked as a developmental student. They don't want to go home and tell their friends who say, oh, you're going to college? Well, not really. I'm in a developmental course. I didn't make it into a college level. That is demoralizing and stigmatizing, and we don't eliminate it, but we reduce it by allowing students directly into a credit course. We also improve their attachment, the Kay McClinney sense of belonging to college. They're in college. They're taking a college-level course. And we have data to show that it does have that effect on them. It also means that instead of being, and this is one of the reasons I prefer our model to the stretch model. In the stretch model, they're in a section of English 101, but it's all developmental students. In our model, half the class is credit level students. So they're exposed to stronger writers, and in some cases, students who are stronger at doing college, who know their way around the library or know how to find the advising office or fill out a FAFSA form. Yeah, oh, wonderful.
So have you done studies to see what the effects are on those college level students?
Yeah. We have not. CCRC is doing a study right now that's going to look at that for us. Our sort of anecdotal sense, one of the things, the question was, what is the effect on the college level students? There's a button on here which makes my whole PowerPoint go away, and I've been warned by Darren not to push it, but my thumb keeps going. But anyhow, two things we worry about those students. One, do they do as well in English 101 and English 102 as students are in a section with all credit level students? And number two, are they resentful of having, and now I can answer the second question because we talk about this with our 101 classes, and we find a variety of responses. Some of the 101 level students say, oh, great, we've got developmental students in here. My chances of getting an A just went up. Then we also have the experience as the semester rolls along that some of the students at the 101 level become a little bit jealous of the extra help the developmental students get, and so we like to say you can come to the developmentals anytime you don't understand something in the 101 class. Stick around, and you're welcome. You don't have to pay. That helps with that problem. It's not really most of the students. The 101 level students have a math class or a psychology class the next hour, but it does help. Good question. Anybody? Yeah, another question back. Let's see, you've opened the floodgates now.
Hi, Ed Carmine from Mercer here. I noticed you said that the student with the red hat can opt in to the ALP section. Is that a key component of the success, is not making it just required? If you place here, you're going to be in one of these sections?
It's such a good question, and it's one that is right now in the. We're in our 6th year now, and we're getting about 80% of the developmental students. We're offering 240 sections of ALP this year, and that is accounting for about 80% of the developmental students who are eligible for it. Those of us who are somewhat, shall we say, enthusiastic, maybe even zealous about ALP, think that after 6 years, it's really criminal. It's like a medical experiment in which half the group is getting a placebo, and you see that the group getting the treatment is getting much better. I'll let the results out of the bag. I already mentioned it earlier, that we double their chances of success when they take ALP. And so some of us would like to see us get to 100% sooner. We know, though, that there are some students at our school who are only taking one course a semester. That's all they can afford because of time or money. They couldn't do ALP because they have to register for 2 courses. There are some students, we still have a separate reading department and reading courses. If students are required to take the upper level developmental reading class, they have to take it as a co-requisite with ALP, and that means they've got to take 9 credits that semester of developmental reading and writing, and there are lots of students who can only take 6 credits in a semester. So we're always going to offer some of the traditional standalone sections, but we're just trying to figure out what's the right balance. One of the things, and I was going to talk about this during the scaling up talk, but I'm going to talk about it now because it's just the right moment. We're wrestling now with why there are students who are eligible for ALP and elect not to do it. And we've been talking to our advisors about, and the major reason is they're insecure about their writing ability, and the idea of taking 2 English courses at once petrifies them, and they say, oh, that'll be too hard. In fact, but despite our work with the advisors, some of them tell them that it's too hard, that you had a very low Accuplacer score, you shouldn't try ALP. We think that actually ALP makes we have data that shows that ALP makes a bigger difference in the success rates of the low-performing students than the higher-performing students. They don't perform as well as the higher Accuplacer, but their improvement, the rise in their percentage of success is much greater than it is for the students at the upper end of the scale. So what we're working on for next fall is this change. It's fairly subtle, but I think it's going to make a huge difference. We're going to change all of our literature, all of our websites that talk about the assessment and placement system, all of our advice we hope that the advisors give our students, from saying your placement is English 052, but there's this other option. We're just going to reverse that. And they're going to say, and certainly everything in writing is going to say, your placement is ALP. If you can't do that, there is this other option, so that the default placement is going to be into ALP next fall. And we think that will push students, that last 20% that we're not reaching, about 18% of them will get into ALP. It's funny you would ask that. We just had a discussion about that this last week. Okay. I thought I saw another question, but you're actually just moving your hair. Have you ever been to an auction? Sold to the woman in the black blouse. All right. So this means that students are taking the developmental course in a class where there are stronger role models, both at writing and, do I see a question in the back row? Yes. Unlike Uri, I see less well in the back row.
My name's Carol Friend, and I teach here at Mercer. And my question about your English 101, 101 is not the same everywhere. Could you just give a little 25-second introduction of what you do in your 101 course?
Yeah, I can, but let me preface it by a little bit of context, and that is more like New Jersey than Connecticut. Maryland is a very decentralized state, and Community College of Baltimore County is a very decentralized community college, and we have a lot of faculty autonomy, so everything I'm going to say is generally true, but there are lots of exceptions. We do not have a standard textbook adoption. We do have a standard common course outline, and it outlines the objectives and it also the major topics for the course, and we all have to do that, but there's lots of wiggle room in that common course outline. I would say that our developmental writing course is pretty typical in most ways. Not developmental, our 101, yes, I saw you looking puzzled. Our 101 writing course is fairly typical of comp courses nationwide, with one big exception. We start the research process in the first semester course. In fact, we started in English 052 in the developmental course. We talk about, but in a very rudimentary way, doing research and documenting research, even in the developmental course. So that's the major way we're different. We still have lots of people who teach English 101 and who are teaching a course organized around the traditional rhetorical modes. We have lots of people who are not doing that, and we are working hard to win over the ones that are doing it, but we recognize their autonomy, and so we're going to win them over, not order them to stop doing that. We actually have had an interesting discussion on a little online faculty development site about the 5-paragraph essay. We have faculty who say, not of 101, but of the developmental course, if my students at the end of the developmental course can write a good 5-paragraph essay, I'm happy. That's my goal. We have other faculty who say, one of my major goals in the developmental course is to get students to stop thinking that they have to write 5-paragraph essays, to unteach the 5. So I'm trying to give you the range of philosophies. Unfortunately, it made my answer kind of long. All right, other questions? Yeah. Yeah, question was, do adjunct faculty teach ALP? This is one of the, I will, as we go along, admit to some of our mistakes along the way. This was not one of them. From the very beginning, we said if ALP is going to work, and if it's going to be scalable, and we've said that from the, we weren't sure if it was going to work, but if it did work, we wanted it to be something that we could offer on a huge scale. And if it was going to work, it was going to have to be something that works for all faculty, adjuncts, full-timers, old codgers like me, newcomers who've just arrived, people who have a PhD in Ret Comp, people who have an MA in teaching Chaucer, and it has worked with that wide range of faculty. Yeah, good questions. Good questions from everybody. All right, so we got half of the ALP situation. We've got the English 101 part, and now let's take a look at what goes on in the developmental part. That same student registers for a pair, and these sections are paired in, we're a Banner school, our computer management system is Banner, and Banner requires that they sign up for both courses, and if they drop one, they have to drop the other one. They have to stay signed up for both courses. So here she is with her red cap in the developmental course that's paired with the 101 course, and she's joined by the same 9 other developmental students and the same instructor. Now, what this means, this is just a wonderful thing, and here is an idea. By the way, we've stolen ideas from the Stretch program and the Studio program in South Carolina. We've stolen ideas from learning communities, and this is one of them. These 10 students and this instructor spend 6 hours a week together, half that time in a very small section. And there's a kind of a bonding, a kind of relationship among the students and between the students and the instructor that is just magical. And so, there's that problem we were hoping wasn't going to happen. I'm a Mac person. On my Mac, that line looked fine, but on here, it overlapped with the previous line, and I'll tell you what it says. It encourages the cohort effect. That's that learning communities effect that students who take classes together in a cohort form much more attachment to the college. They have they have friends, they have support groups. In ALP classes, those students call each other up when they miss class. They want to know how come you weren't there on Tuesday. They call each other up and ask for clarification. What did he say he wanted, and so forth. So that there's a lot more of that sort of social connection among those 10 students and that instructor. I like to say, as a teacher in a traditional, and our writing classes are all capped at 20. We've been lucky so far, and that there hasn't been a move to increase our class sizes. In a normal class with 20 students, I work hard, because I'm not very good at it, by the end of the semester to know everybody's name. In my ALP sections, I not only know everybody's name, I know their kids' names. And it's just that much, and that's without any particular effort. Some of the things that most of it, we're teaching 5 classes a semester, I suspect most of you are too, and with 20 or 22 or 24 students in a class, it's really hard to have a human relationship. It's hard not to in ALP. It's one of the reasons, and I said I was going to admit some of our failures. Early on, we did not pay much attention to faculty development, and that was a mistake. But one of the things that happens is just being in a classroom with just 10 students is faculty development. You can't teach the same way when you know all your students' personal histories, when you're talking to them and asking them what's causing you the most trouble in the 101 class now. In a way, the structure does faculty development. I was never a particularly good teacher at the touchy-feely stuff. I've gotten much better since I started teaching ALP, just because you can't be the sage on the stage when you only have 10 students. It also changes, I mentioned this earlier, the students' attitude towards the developmental course. No longer do they see it as an obstacle standing in the way of where they want to be, the credit course. In fact, it's something that's helping them succeed in the credit course. It also allows for a lot more individual attention. This is our answer to the modularization thing. We agree with those who argue for modularizing courses so students don't have to spend time doing exercises or doing activities or reading chapters on things they already know. But we accomplish that by having a small enough class size that we can tailor the instruction to those 10 students. If nobody has trouble with apostrophes, we don't mention apostrophes. Of course, it's never been the case that nobody has trouble with apostrophes, but I noticed Penn's Grove doesn't have an apostrophe on it. And finally, having 6 hours a week, 3 of those hours in this small section, allows time. It makes it possible to worry about those things that I talked about earlier as the major reasons we were losing so many students, both those sort of psychological, affective issues and the life issues. We have students, we're English teachers, and for a lot of us said in the beginning, well, I have no idea what kind of advice to give students, to the student who's having epileptic seizures, or the student whose stepfather is abusing her, or the student who's just been fired and doesn't have any income coming in. We're not, they didn't cover that in grad school. And that's still true. We don't have professional training in how to do that, and we don't try to approach it as professionals. What we try to do is approach it as human beings. Human beings who are just willing to listen, give students, and one of the interesting things is some of the best advice that students get in the ALP section comes from other students who went through the same issue last year or last week and can give each other advice. One of the real remarkable things I've noticed is, one of the big problems a lot of our students have is babysitters. My babysitter didn't show up. I couldn't come to class on Tuesday, or she showed up late or something. There are students who actually share babysitters. And it's just, when I have 2 kids, and when they were little, I would never give my babysitter's phone numbers to anyone else, and they share babysitters' phone numbers. So those are the kinds of, that's how the structure works, and those are the kinds of advantages we see from it. Also, one thing that sometimes is difficult for some schools, particularly schools that have a separate dev ed department from English, or particularly schools where the credentials to teach developmental courses are just a BA or rather than an MA in English, and so that the faculty teaching the developmental courses are not credentialed to teach the credit level course. It makes ALP hard to do, and one of the things that we think is really important is that if possible, that the same teacher is teaching both courses, because it really makes it, we always start this class by saying, any questions left over from the 101? And there often are. Sometimes we don't get beyond that. But if you weren't the teacher in the 101 class, it's a lot harder to understand what was puzzling to that student or those students. And so we do a lot of work on coordinating the 2 syllabi, so what's going on in the developmental course is really supportive of what's going on in the credit course. And that's a lot harder to do if you don't have the same instructor for both courses. Not impossible, but harder to do. So, I mentioned this earlier. I just want to point out that there's this huge difference between the two courses. The developmental course has a much more limited goal. It's to get students past the developmental course. And the ALP course has this much more ambitious goal to get as many students as possible past the 101 course. And that changes the whole, both from the student's point of view and the faculty's point of view, what goes on in the developmental course. I talked to somebody from Tennessee about a year ago who said their developmental course, writing courses, are set up this way. In the lower, they have 2 levels of developmental writing. In the lower level course, they teach the 9th grade essay. In the upper level developmental course, they teach the 11th grade essay. And then when they get to comp, they teach the college level essay. I think that's a terrible idea. Why would you waste time teaching people how to write a 5-paragraph essay when you can teach them how to write a college essay? And they can practice, so that idea of taking a complicated skill like writing college-level essays and breaking it down into sub-steps, we think is a mistake, and we don't do that. Uri referred to it as backwards mapping, and we call it backwards curriculum design. What we do in the developmental course is based on what they're going to have to do in the developmental course. We give them the same level of readings. If they're reading at the 7th grade level, we give them a college novel to read. Last year we used a nonfiction book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This year we're using No Impact Man. We give them a college level book to read, and then we provide support and scaffolding. Same thing with writing assignments. We don't have them write 9th grade essays. We have them write college essays, but we help them with it. We do a lot more interventions, a lot more scaffolding. So really quickly, this is just sort of in general, in answer to the woman in the back row a minute ago, this is equally, this is a generalization. Nobody does it exactly like this, but after 6 years of conversations, this sort of summarizes what people are doing in the ALP class. The goal is to get students to pass the 101. Most people conduct the class as a writing workshop. That we answer questions left over from 101. We provide opportunities for more practice at writing, lots of short writing assignments, lots of ungraded writing assignments, but not necessarily not looked at. Discussing and brainstorming of ideas for the 101 papers, reviewing of drafts, working on reducing the frequency and severity of sentence level error, and finally, addressing non-cognitive issues. All right, so I just wanted for a minute to show you, there are lots of other schools that are doing ALP and doing it in lots of different ways. Some schools can't do the same instructor, so here we have 2 different instructors. We really do think if your school has to do it this way, that those 2 faculty members should be compensated in some way for the time it takes to coordinate the 2 courses, the planning time before the semester to coordinate their plans for the 2 courses. Without that, there's no hope that the courses will reinforce each other. The really inventive model, I don't like this model, but I sure think it's clever. Schools whose administration say, and perhaps it's even true, that they can't afford ALP, sometimes do this, 2 101 sections, each feeding 8 students into a developmental course, and the same instructor teaching all 3 courses. From a scheduling point of view, that's really hard to get, especially if you're working with a lot of adjuncts. But we call that the pyramid model, and Middlesex Community College, Atlantic Cape Community College here in New Jersey is doing this model. I'm right, aren't I? Effie, where are you? I'm right, aren't I? You're doing this model. Yeah. Some schools are doing it with different instructors. We think that. But folks, one of the things that we've learned, I've done a lot of work with schools all over the country in trying to adapt ALP to the local situation. I describe it in what I think of as idealized terms, but if it's not possible at your school, do as much of it as you can. Do as much of it as you can and that makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to do it this way, leave that part out. But so schools that can't figure out a way to have the same instructor teach both courses or all 3 courses, okay, then do it this way. It's better than not doing it at all. All right, let's look at some data. At the top of this slide are going to be data on traditional students. These data are different from the ones in the brochure that you got. The ones in the brochure are from a study that CCRC at Columbia did of us I think it was 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. These data are more up to date, but they haven't been published yet, and they will be on the CCRC website. Sung-Woo Cho is the main author of the study, and I call him every week, and he says, next week, definitely. He's been saying that since August, but any day now, you'll see these data on their website. They looked at students who took English 052, traditional course, between fall of 07 and fall of 2010. It was a total of more than 5,000 students. And they found that 65% of them passed developmental English, and for the ALP students in the same period of time, much smaller sample. In those early days, we were only offering 5 sections, much smaller sample, but 82%. We were pretty happy with that. That's a jump from 65 to 82. If my math is right, that's a 17% jump, and we were really happy with that. And then there's this fact that they confirmed what we had found with our Apple IIe computer back in 1992, that their study at 17%, remember we had 16% of students succeed in the developmental course and never attempt the credit level course. They drop out of the system. Here's a quiz for you guys. You know, I wouldn't be up here talking if we didn't improve on that 17%. How many of you think we at least cut it in half, down to say 8% or less? Yeah, everybody's not. How many think we cut it down to a quarter, maybe only 4%? How many think we cut it all the way to 0? Raise your hands. Yeah, that's the smart people. We cut it to 0, of course. Why did we cut it to 0? Not because we're great teachers, it's a trick. They can't drop out. They take the 2 courses simultaneously. There is no exit point for them to exit from. So even if we're lousy teachers, we're still going to get a 17% bump in success rates. And we'll take it any way we can get it. And now let's look at what we're really interested in, the bottom line. And what we're finding is that for our those 5,000 traditional students, just about as it was in the early 90s, 33% succeed in passing English 101. And for the ALP students, that's a really amazing 74%. When we first got these kinds of data, we did it internally with our own IR office at first. We didn't show anybody. It was so good, we knew no one would believe it. And that's the wonderful thing about CCRC. If they say it, people actually believe it. And I wanted to show you this chart just to show you that over 4 semesters, these are just fall data, but over 4 semesters, it's very consistent. It hasn't, we had a lot of people who said, yeah, early adopters are very enthusiastic and it'll work early on, but later on you're going to have trouble, it's going to drop off. We have not experienced that. And then people sometimes say, yeah, but how do they do when they get to 102? Maybe you talk about all this bonding with those students, maybe you cut them a little slack and pass them so that you get a higher success rate because you're too easy on the ALP students. So to measure that, we looked at how do they do when they get to English 102, where they have a different instructor who hasn't bonded with them, who doesn't know they were an ALP student. And here's what we found. Of the original cohort in the traditional program, 13% ever registered for English 102, 50% of the ALP cohort did. And for pass rates, 10% of the original cohort and 33% of the ALP cohort. So at the 101 level, we've doubled the success rate. At the 102 level, we tripled the success rate. And so we think that wouldn't be true if we were letting students into English 102 who weren't ready for it. And finally, we're beginning, and this is really exciting data, but it's a little bit preliminary, but we're beginning to address the question of, okay, so it works while they're in their English courses. How does it work longer range? Do these kinds of improved retention rates, improved success rates continue after a year, after 2 years? So the next year, after they take the developmental course, we find the number of students who persist 1 year after the developmental course is 64% for ALP, 48% for the traditional students. And this is the part, one reason I always show this slide is because I want to tell you that those data are significant at the 1% level according to the two-tailed test. I have no idea what a two-tailed test is, but I love to say it. Sounds a little bit sort of spicy. And using the same spicy test, the number of courses students have completed 1 year after their developmental course, for the traditional students is 1.87, for ALP students is 2.87, and the number of credits completed is 5.51 for traditional and 8.54 credits on average for ALP students. So we're beginning to see, as we look at longitudinal data, that the ALP students are showing remarkably significant, I guess if you believe the two-tailed test, significant improvement over the traditional students. I want to talk for just a second about what makes this all possible. This is sort of a summary of everything I've been saying. We think ideally, if you can pull it off, here's the parts of the ALP program that we think contribute most to its success. One, students take the developmental writing course concurrently with the credit course rather than as a prerequisite. The same instructor teaches both courses. At least half the students in the credit course are credit level students. The ALP students is no larger. Ours is 10. Some of you may have heard ours was 8 a few years ago, and we're now confident enough that it works. We've agreed to raise the class size to 10. I have no trouble with a school that wants to do it at 12. I think you will experience less success if you get much over this class. But if you do and you experience just as much success or more than we do, let us know about it. We want to know if we can do it with more students. We'd like to know that. But we think the small class size is an important factor in ALP success. We think it's important that the faculty recognize that they have an obligation to pay attention to the whole student, to their lives outside of school, to what's going on in their heads about their confidence levels and their fear levels and so forth. And we also think, and this is a new bullet, the bottom one, that we've only added in the last year and a half maybe, that we've begun to pay a lot more attention to what goes on in the classroom, to our pedagogy. Again, speaking to the woman in the back row, we're very decentralized. We're not going to ever tell anybody you can't teach the 5-paragraph essay, or you can't teach grammar, or you can't do X or Y. But we are doing a huge effort to get our faculty to buy into what Uri called backwards mapping. We call it backwards curriculum design. That is developmental courses that are modeled on the target course, and you do the same things you do in the target course, but with more support. We emphasize active learning, not try to move on the scale away from spending most of our time in lecture discussion and having students figuring out things for themselves a lot more. We pay conscious attention to improving their reasoning skills. We are not yet where I think we should be, and that is truly integrating our reading and writing courses. How many of you in New Jersey do actually have your developmental reading, your developmental writing classes, or one class? Where are you all? Bergen? Yeah, way to go, Lee. Yeah, and Passaic next semester. Yeah. How many of you who had your hands up have ever listened to Katie Hearn? Yeah, Katie Hearn at Chabot College in California has done a lot of work with our school, and we're moving in that direction. My colleague Jamie Gallagher, sitting over here next to the column, teaches an integrated reading and writing course at a sort of pre-ALP level, and for us, it's been a territory and political issue, not an educational issue, and I hope we'll be able to improve that. But while we haven't, in ALP, we're talking. I have to say, I think some of you may have actually been we do a conference every June, and the information on the conference is on the back of the flyer I gave you. We'll be doing it again next June. I think it's the 11th, 12th, and 13th. But I think it was our second conference, Lynn Troika, who I know has worked with the Brookdale people some. Lynn Troika was our keynote speaker, and she was urging us to integrate reading and writing, and she looked out at the writing faculty in the room, and they said, don't be afraid that you aren't trained anybody can teach reading. Well, you can imagine how that went over. And the head of the reading department, my good friend Rachel Lawton, said to me, well, how would you feel, Peter, if someone said anyone can teach writing? It took me about 48 hours to answer her question, but my answer was this. Actually, we do say that. We not only say anybody can teach writing, we think they should teach writing. That's what writing across the curriculum, or writing in the disciplines, is all about. We do think everybody in every department ought to be helping build on the writing skills that students learn in the comp courses. And so we've sort of adopted that model in ALP. That is, we're calling it reading across the curriculum. We're building on what students are getting in their reading courses. We have workshops with the reading faculty where they help us understand that telling a student to look up every word in the dictionary that they encounter that they don't know is probably not, in most cases, good advice for successful reading, which lots of us writing teachers thought was good advice, and so forth. So we consciously are trying to integrate. We're trying to not make the assumption that when we ask students to read an article or read some chapters in a book and write in response to it, that they can do that reading without some support from us. So we're recognizing, even though we don't integrate our courses formally, except at the level where Jamie is, we do unconsciously, informally, not formally, informally. There, got it, 3 tries. Informally, we do more and more every semester, and in our faculty development efforts, we're really working on helping writing faculty get better at building on the reading courses. All right, what else is on that list? Yeah, editing skills. A point of much contention. We have faculty who do think that people ought to be able to identify the 8 parts of speech. We have faculty who've taken graduate courses in linguistics and who say, well, there aren't 8 parts of speech. There are 11, or what, you know, it's sort of like whether Pluto is a planet or not. But a couple of years ago, I was of the school that believed there are certain things, certain grammar things that students ought to know. Identifying subjects and verbs was, I said, you know, how can you check subject-verb agreement? How can you know whether you have a fragment or not if you can't see whether a group of words has a subject and a verb? And so I had a test that my students had to pass, a quiz, a drill and skill exercise they had to pass, underlining the subjects once and the verbs twice. One of my students had failed it. I had multiple. I would make them up. If a student had failed it 6 times, I'd make up. Nobody ever had, but I'd make up a 7th version. I had a student who passed it 4 times, failed it 4 times, and he took his 4 exercises to the writing center and met with a tutor, and he came back to class, the next class period, and he said, I took your advice, and I went to the writing center, and I saw a tutor, and she said, this test is way too hard, that it's full of trick questions, and nobody could, half the English faculty couldn't get this, pass this test. And I said, who was your tutor? Who was your tutor? It turned out to be my good friend, Amy Wilson. And I went, I knew she was tutoring at that. I said, you wait here. And I went to the writing center. And Amy said, I know why you're here. I never should have said it, but it was true. And so I had an argument with Amy about it. I said, I don't think so. I think students need to be able to identify subjects and verbs. She said, oh, yeah, in a general way, but not with the degree of specificity that you're, you know, is it a compound subject? Is it a subject transposed because the sentence starts with there, so the subject is at the end of the sentence? All those tricky things. She said, not like that. They don't need that degree of skill at identifying subjects and verbs. So I said, Amy doesn't teach developmental English. She teaches honors English 102 courses and women's studies courses. She agreed to take my quiz and give it to her honors English 102 students. No one passed my quiz. No one. Like the lowest score was like 43 errors in 20 sentences. And no one was even close to passing it. It really has awakened me to the fact that that kind of understanding of grammar is we're probably doing overkill. And partially with the help of Jamie, who's educated me a lot in the last couple of years about this, that we don't think that editing skills are unimportant. We do feel an obligation to help our students reduce both the frequency and the severity of sentence level error in their writing, but we don't think what traditionally many of us did as teaching grammar really went very far towards that. So that's what we do about, and incidentally, so what do you do instead? Well, we're still working on that. We have some ideas, but we're not, our faculty development and our pedagogy is very much an evolving event. A little bit about scaling up. Oh my God. We're going to scale up real fast. We started with 5 sections each semester and only 8 students in a section. Now we're up to 160 sections last year, 240 this year, and we're up to 10 students in a section now. I wanted you to see this. 90 schools around the country, every one of these dots represents one of them, not necessarily located in the right part of the state, but in the correct state. So, some of these schools, I have no idea where they are. Notice 4 in Hawaii. I'm waiting for them to invite me over to work with them. I've already been invited to Alaska, and I was too busy that way. But I could come to New Jersey. It's only a 2.5-hour drive. Also, there are 3 states, Michigan, Indiana, and Arkansas, that are working hard to adopt ALP statewide. And furthermore, here's a list of the schools. And this, when I was putting this together for you all, I noticed something really interesting. The ones in red are all in New Jersey: Atlantic Cape Community College, Bergen Community College, Bloomfield, and Brookdale Community Colleges. I think I figured out what's going on in New Jersey. You guys are adopting ALP in alphabetical order. All right, so it is, by the way, I should say, of these 90 schools, none of them is doing it exactly the way we do it. Every one of them has taken our ideas, picked the ones they like, tailored them to their own philosophy, their own students, their own faculty, and so forth. I'm only going to talk about cost, and then I'm going to stop. Just really quickly, let me run through this. What we're going to do is figure out what it costs to get to be successful with a developmental student under traditional models. We're going to imagine 1,000 students show up in September, and you put them in sections of 20 in the traditional model at our school. And so you will need 50 sections to handle those students' developmental needs, 3 faculty credit hours. We're not going to do dollars because it depends on the salary of the faculty, but it costs the school 3 faculty credit hours for each course, or a total of 150 faculty credit hours for the developmental part. Now remember, in our traditional model, only 54% of those students will ever attempt English 101. So we only need enough sections for 540 students, and that means at 20 students per section, 27 sections at 3 faculty credit hours each, or a total of 81 faculty credit hours, or total for the developmental and the credit work under the traditional model for 1,000 students is 231 faculty credit hours. You don't have to remember this. I'm going to show it to you again in a minute. But let's run through the same calculation for ALP, where 1,000 students show up, and we put them in sections of 10, and so we're going to need 100 sections, twice as many sections. And we're going to pay the faculty 3 faculty credit hours, so that's going to cost the college 300 faculty credit hours of salary. And then in addition, remember that 100% of those students are going to take English 101 because they take it concurrently. And so we're going to need enough English 101 for all 1,000 students at 20 sections in the 101 class per student. And so that's 50 sections at 3 faculty credit hours. That's an additional 150 faculty credit hours. And so you can see in this little summary slide that it appears that ALP is actually twice as expensive as the traditional model. But we know about appearances, don't we? They can be deceptive, right? Yeah. So let's do a different analysis. And while we're doing this bean counting, dollars and cents analysis, let's just go the whole hog. Something I learned when I was working with the schools in Arkansas. They all say, whole hog, Razorbacks, go Razorbacks. Let's pretend we're wealthy industrialists, and our corporation has made so much money, we need to acquire a new factory. And in our region of the country, there are 2 factories that are available for purchase: a traditional, ugly, smoke-billowing factory. And we do a little research and find out it would cost us $231,000 a year to run that factory. And the sleek, cute little ALP factory, green factory, would cost almost twice as much to run per year. You see, those are the same ratios that we had for. Okay, and now let's go, if we're smart industrialists, we won't stop there. We'll say, but how productive are those factories? And let's suppose we investigate and find out that if we buy the traditional factory, it will produce 33,000 of whatever it is that we produce. And the ALP factory, 74,000 of our product. And so that means that the cost per product is actually lower in what appeared to be, and you can see where I'm going. If we change widgets to students, and the numbers are exactly the same, 330 versus 740, then the cost per successful student is actually lower under the ALP program. So when people say we can't afford it, tell them they can't afford not to do it. And furthermore, it's not students per year, it's students in 1 semester. We do it in half the time. So to sum up this long-winded talk, it was your fault for asking all those questions. ALP doubles the success rate, cuts the attrition rate in half, does it in half the time at slightly less cost per developmental student. I hope you'll consider ALP as one way to reform. We'll take one question. So let me say, I just got the word that those of you who wanted your T-bone steaks rare, that won't be possible because I've talked so long. They're all going to be well done. And so rather than respond to that specifically, I just want to say, you know, that's an example of what seemed to me like some really enlightened approaches to trying to solve this problem, and I really applaud your doing it at Essex County College. And I would love to hear more about it during lunch. Let's go eat those steaks. It is steaks, isn't it, Larry? I was saying to somebody during one of the breaks today, you know, I live only 2.5 hours south of here in Baltimore, and we did not experience Sandy in Baltimore. I mean, we had some winds and rain, but nothing like New Jersey. And even though we're so close, I really saw what happened in New Jersey through CBS and ABC and CNN and so forth. But I think in a way, because I'm that far away from you, this entire country was riveted on you folks for that 5 or 6 day period. And you really were an inspiration, the way you helped each other. And then to come here and see you all here. So when some of you still don't have power, it's really inspiring. And it's been a wonderful day for me. And the energy in this room it's just been inspirational. And I don't know if you know, I was in New Jersey just exactly 4 weeks ago today. I was down at Atlantic Cape Community College, and it was a great trip, had a great visit, great presentation in the morning, and then I had a heart attack that night. And it's really true, and it was not a bad heart attack, and this is my first public appearance. I was sort of, I brought Jamie along. But, well, I just want to say I'll come back anytime if you guys need help. You're doing a great job. And as Uri said this morning, and I tried to add to it, this is really important work. This is really important work for the entire fabric of our culture in America, the work that community colleges do, and particularly the work we do in developmental ed. So all those ideas that you had today, try to think of yourself as still battling that hurricane and see if you can put some of that energy towards the kinds of ideas that you were talking about today, because I think you're off to a great start.
Thank you very much.